guys, before we get into today's podcast, just want to let you know that you'll notice the last podcast I did was a retrospective on sensei who have inspired me, and there's more coming. Just takes a little bit of time to put them together, get footage and sort of marry all that stuff up. So in the meantime, I'm going to continue to do the podcast and just kind of sprinkle them in as I find time to produce them. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed last week. I hope you enjoyed this week. This week we're going to talk a little bit about the art of spinning plates. Kia ora, I'm Tuari Dawson and you're listening to the Invisible Sensei podcast. It's kind of a cliche now, but back in the day, one of the things that always amazed me, when they used to have those old school magic shows on television. Yes, television, it was a thing. There were shows on it and people watched it. And they used to have these magic shows. And a lot of times, they'd have kind of variety acts and things like that. And one of the things that always impressed me were those guys who used to be able to spin the plates on the end of, pointed sticks. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll try and give you a basic breakdown. So what would happen is they would balance a normal plate on the end of a stick and they'd start spinning it, and then they'd put up another and another and another and do kind of progressively more difficult stunts and put up more plates and be spinning. And I always used to wonder, how do they spin the plates without dropping them? And I guess the question is, how many plates did they break before they got to the point where they could spin them and kind of have a sense of where everything was and keep it all going, because it was always amazing to me. And the reason I bring this up was the other day I got a message from a close friend who we train together, we're tight mates, and I think he's an excellent martial artist. He's coming up to close to 40 years of training. And what was interesting about the message, just it's one of those voice messages and just amusing. Amusing, not amusing, by the way. And he was talking about, look, I don't feel like I'm making headway. I feel like my karate is not as good as once it was. I'm paraphrasing, of course. I feel like I'm not making progress, and I feel like if anything, I've kind of gone backwards. And what he termed his decision-making process, or what he felt to be his combat reflexes, had dulled a little bit, or certainly weren't at the place where he would like them to be and where they were. For a little bit of context, both he and I had sensei who were, I guess what you would call dojo brothers. In a sense, they came through Kyokushin and they went to Okinawan Gojuru and carried a lot of the Kyokushin mindset into their Gojuru in a really positive way. Attention to basics, physical fitness, repetition, all those great things, and then kind of that really informed the way they taught us Gojuru, which I think is a really good thing. I'm really glad that I had that experience, as is he. Anyway, he's talking about, what his feelings are, and it's really not one of those things where he's feeling sorry for himself. It's really a reflection. We had a session, we were training a little while ago, and, I felt the session was going really well. And he came away quite dissatisfied with himself. As I said, he's easily had 40 years of training, and it was funny because I suppose after I got the message, I kind of sat with it for a bit and sort of thought about how it reflects on his mindset, my mindset, our upbringing, our training, and that's why the spinning plate thing kind of came to mind. I think for me with karate in particular, which is my style of preference, it is like spinning plates. Within that one term, it's not just about punching and kicking. There are so many elements to it. If you do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, or you do Taekwondo or Tang Sudo, or whatever martial art you happen to practice, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. it is about attention to a whole bunch of different plates spinning on the end of really sharp sticks. And from time to time, those plates come down. It's just impossible to stay at the lip, shall we say, of perfection, if ever there was such a thing. And it's funny how we reflect upon our own development and how others reflect upon you, what you do, how you pursue the art, how you practice your technique and all those sorts of things. From my perspective, he's younger than me, fitter than me, more flexible than me, but also if you listen to the way that I talk about him, I'm talking about him in reference to myself, so I'm making it about myself, right? He kind of sees himself as being quite rusty, and for me, I feel that, one, he's too harsh on himself, but two, I understand it. I understand when you feel like you're kind of just sort of out of balance, and maybe, is it an age thing? I don't know. Maybe it's kind of like there's some expectations about what we were able to do, and also, like before when I was talking about the context of our training, we had quite, shall we say, hearty sensei. And so the expectation we have of ourselves is quite high. And even as I say that, I go, is it the expectation really high? I think for me, I know my sensei and I know his sensei. We're huge influences on our lives. And there's this thing, I think, for me, where I would like to be in a position where I do justice to those great lessons that I was taught. And I'm sure it's the same for him. And a lot of times we just fall short, or we perceive ourselves to fall short. Now, this is a guy who's a successful businessman. He's a great father, a great husband. He's so many things. He's a great musician. There's a whole lot of strings to that particular bow. He's won all sorts of prizes and accolades for the quality of his work. And, to be totally honest, he's a great example of what a martial artist should be. Keeps his word, makes promises and keeps them. And, extremely, extremely talented individual physically. But isn't it funny how he perceives himself? And so I was thinking, what would be the advice that I would give him? Because I wanted to go back and be supportive. And then I kind of, again, making it about me, as I often do, I thought, what would I say to myself? And it's a harder question, because it's always great giving other people advice, but within the martial arts, especially if you're in the role of an instructor, it's harder to actually take your own advice. I know I'm full of great advice when it comes to other people. So I'm going to relate to you kind of the spirit of what I said to him, and I guess in a way to myself. And that is, sometimes the judge that we go to is an extremely harsh one. And it's the one that sits inside our head, the one that sits inside our heart, the one that looks back, the one that compares, the one that, is very, very judgmental about every aspect. You're doing a technique and that judge will say, I used to be able to kick higher or harder or faster. Remember when you used to be able to do a roundhouse just standing there and hold it up? And remember when you used to do a choke and you could just lock it in and it would work every single time? You name it, you know what I'm talking about. I think sometimes it's important to have a support network. And this is going to sound really weird, and some people may go, oh my gosh, this is very hippie sounding, but it's not. Think about the community that you exist in. Think about what you're trying to get out of the martial arts and who you turn to in those sort of situations. I know for me, I have a group of friends, very close friends, both here in New Zealand and in other countries, in Okinawa, in Canada, in America and the UK. I'm very lucky, and that's all thanks to this podcast, available all good podcasts, broadcast, by the way. Anyway, back to our regularly scheduled show. But oftentimes, if I'm feeling, and I might ask myself, is this an issue of ego? It's not, I don't think. Maybe it is sometimes, if we're being honest. I like to feel, I want to be pretty. I want someone to tell me that I'm pretty and I'm good and pat me on the head and say, you're worthy. Of course, It's sort of the human thing to do. But in this instance, I often turn to people that I trust for advice, not necessarily for them to tell me, how cool I am, but to have a perspective that's other than my own, and maybe it's a way forward. And it's not about warm strokes, but it's about learning when there is work to be done and when you're just being too damn harsh on yourself. And I know for me, the world in which I live, I have to make time to do all the things. Even just doing this podcast is quite, I have to get up very early and do training and all these sorts of things even before the day starts, because I've got to get to work and all these things that we all have to do, right? And sometimes, like this morning, I was training out, did I do enough? Did I train hard enough? Well, I sweated and I'm tired and I really, really want some breakfast, so I'm going to take that as a yes. In terms of spinning the plates, I think sometimes take the plates down off those spinny sticks, put them back in the cupboard and stop trying to spin so many plates. Concentrate on certain elements. So like for me, I think that I have a creative way of staying engaged with my training. Is it for everyone? No. And I've talked about it before on the podcast, but let's go over it again. So what I've tried to do, and I'm very lucky in the sense that I don't have a huge cadre of students or a huge organisation or anything like that I have to sort of continually teach. I'm very lucky in that I get to focus on my training the way that I want to do it and so on and so forth. So here's some elements that I use. One, I really use the outdoors. So I like to train in the outdoors. Sometimes when I'm going to work, I'll chuck a ball or some kuburo gear in the back of the car and go to work, and then I'll find some space and time at lunchtime or after work. I find a park somewhere, a secluded area, and just do some training. And I always have sounds on. I really like to have a playlist going. Call me crazy. I incorporate a lot of stretching, and I try to make the training as fun as I possibly can. And now some people go, training fun? Well, when I say fun, I want to get something out of it, but I'll be realistic about what I want to do. Sometimes it's time, sometimes it's content. Maybe there's something that I really, really want to practice. Maybe there's something that I really, really should practice, but it's finding the time to do that. I like to go outside and use the outdoors because I think there's a lot of energy. It just feels good to get outdoors, but I'm not talking about walking into a mall or something like that and full gi and start spinning your ball or whatever. Just find your own space. It may be at the beach, could be in the water, I don't know. Like I said, I always use music, so I have a bunch of playlists that I have. I also kind of like to train in a way that is, it's not easy, but I guess it's low-hanging fruit in the sense that I like to pre-organise what I'm going to do. Well, in the sense that I'll put my gear up, or I'll go up to the dojo and hang my gear up for the morning, and I'll have my coffee ready for the morning, and I'll have a glass of water, or have a towel ready for a shower after training. I try and pre-arrange all that sort of stuff. Like probably about 70% of the time I do. Sometimes I don't. And then it's just sort of, I don't have to expend too much energy, time, or focus worrying about, rumbling around in my drawers at 5 o'clock in the morning trying to find, my obi or my gi pants or whatever. I also, sometimes, I take regular breaks. So sometimes I'll get out there and I'll train for 2 hours. Sometimes I'll get out there and I'll go, what can I do practically that's going to move the needle, or at least put me in a better space in 20 minutes, 25 minutes, whatever it is. And I think that's one of the things about doing martial arts, is that we can do it anywhere, but we can apply it in lots of different ways. So this morning I was out throwing around some weights, some kettlebells and this and that, and it's to be honest, is it an award-winning Karate Kid training montage level? Not really, but it felt good to do. I hit the bag for 10 minutes. And let me tell you, hitting the bag for 10 minutes, hitting the bag for a minute, as you know, is tiring. So I just take my time and I just try and go, right, I'm just going to try and hit this sucker for 10 minutes. Maybe for you it's 2 minutes. Maybe for you it's a quality 60 seconds. I don't know. But what I encourage you to do is customize your training to fit your mentality, customize your training to fit your goals, and find enjoyment in it. Another thing to do also too, from time to time, like I said to my bro, I said, hey man, maybe you want to go and do some training with some other people, not as a comparison, but just to keep it, keep it fresh. See what other people do. I mean, at certain times in my life, that's what I've done. I've gone and even sat in and watched another session of another dojo, and it's inspired me all over. And not to go with a mindset of look how cool we are and look how crap they are, but actually go in and just enjoy and watch and sort of sit as an observer. And for me, one of the things that I really enjoy is watching younger practitioners train, especially when they've got that fire and they train hard, and they don't know how wonderful it is to have the full use of the body and the recovery and what's that thing called, the metabolism. But also too, that is an extremely motivational thing. Also too, I love watching some of the older practitioners. When I was in Okinawa last year, I went to Karate no Hi, which, as you probably know, is World Karate Day, down in Naha, down in Kokusai-dori, in the main street of Naha, watching all these different styles and people practice, and then these elderly gentlemen, well, I shouldn't call them elderly, these advanced in age of a certain generation were practicing kobudo. And it was just inspirational, not in the sense of that condescending, it's great to see people of that age still doing it, but I mean it, that their technique was quality. You could see they'd spent decades and decades training, and it was just so inspiring. Sometimes it's about YouTube. Sometimes it's about getting a movie that you like. I mean, for me back in the day, there used to be this game called Karate Champ. In video games, when you had to go to a thing called a video parlor, kids. And I used to go and play it. I know for some reason it was called Karate Champ. One guy in a red gi, one guy in a white gi, and you go in there and it had joysticks. And I just used to really like it. It was a little ritual. I used to go do that before karate, and for some reason it really motivated me. But look, find your motivation, but also find some honesty with yourself. It's okay not to be the doyen of whatever martial art you do. It is literally about progress as opposed to perfection. It's about being kind to ourselves. And, there's lots of competing material out there. We see Instagram and YouTube and even things like this, podcasts and things like that are telling us things about how we should diet or how we should train, or resistance training, or, there's that whole thing around, train like a samurai. And I listened to something the other day, and it was talking about, you must train for the battle and so on and so forth. And maybe I'm not samurai enough, but I guess for me, the reason that I train now is, there's an element of self-defense. There always will be an element of self-defense, but I want to be a more focused, more level, more happy, more approachable person. In my private life, I want to be able to listen to people and take what people say in, as opposed to for sitting there just chomping at the bit to have my say. So it's all those kind of little things. So I would encourage you to stop spinning the plates, take them down, put them on the bench, put something you like on them, chicken breast, a little bit of broccoli, maybe a bit of rice, nice cold drink, put some food on the plate and eat it. But stop being so goddamn hard on yourself.